whatever. Now we are ready. So I will be talking about the limits of L2. So the talk will be, will kind of challenge a pretty dominant assumption that's dominant in the Ethereum ecosystem right now. And the idea is, well, you have Ethereum, and then the way to scale is to have a bunch of L2s. And I will make on this presentation, can I actually take the mic? It would be easier. Yeah, so I will make the argument that L2s are not enough and that we instead need more than that. Oh no. Oh yeah, okay. So this talk will discuss the trade-offs of L2s, and therefore also to some degree criticize them. But again, my message is not that there's something wrong with L2s. It's just that they do come with trade-offs, and those trade-offs should be acknowledged. So for some use case, we would argue they are actually not the right solution. So let's first discuss how we came here. So right now, very obviously, Ethereum doesn't scale. So kind of the dominant solution right now is to have L2s. In fact, the reason to do L2s was that other chains would always have the problem that you need a bridge, and the bridging technology to other chains introduced risks, and that's what L2s are trying to solve. But there were significant improvements made for bridges, and we now have zero knowledge-based trust minimized bridges, so that somewhat is changing the equation. But we'll come to those conclusions later. So first, there is a very, very obvious criticism of the current state of L2s, and that is that at this point, while the work is real, the research is real, but the current implementation of L2s is what I would call mostly memes. So the L2s that exist right now do actually not bring the security guarantees they are supposed to bring. In fact, they are upgradable by a multisig, so essentially you are trusting that multisig and you're not trusting kind of the actual mechanism. So there's this great website, L2Beat, that really goes into the detail of the risk, and kind of just to pick the two biggest ones. So Optimism is live, but it doesn't even have the fraud proofs yet. So the sequencer can just kind of submit any malicious state, and there's nothing you can do about it. And even Arbitrum, they have fraud proofs, but first the fraud proofs can only be executed by kind of permissioned. Basically, there's a permissioning system only if you're allowed to submit fraud proofs. So, well, that's already one part. But then there's also a multisig that can do arbitrary upgrades, and actually this multisig is doing transactions every few weeks. So, kind of every few weeks, they could immediately, just in theory, wipe out the 2 billion that are in the bridge. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about kind of, let's assume all those things are fixed, and let's assume L2s are in their actual desired final state. Let's discuss those trade-offs. So the original idea of L2s was the idea of temporary spaces. So you are on the L1, you have your asset on the L1, you make a deposit into the L2, then you do a bunch of transactions in the L2, and eventually you come back and settle on the L1. And that's kind of the picture. It's liminal spaces, so spaces you don't really stay in, you kind of you pass through, but eventually you come back. And that was the original kind of thing. People said, and kind of also that's where the name rollup comes from. So you deposit, you do a bunch of transactions and kind of you roll them up, and you can eventually settle back on L1. So let's look into that. So first of all, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this concept, and it does increase scalability, but there are absolutely limits to this scalability that you can get through that. And I think one example that makes this very, very obvious is to look at Bitcoin and Lightning, because that's essentially the same promise. So you kind of deposit into your Lightning channel, then you do kind of a lot of Lightning transactions, but eventually you withdraw. And some people, well, naive people on Twitter claim Lightning therefore solves all scalability problems, and if everyone would just use Lightning, then no problem with scalability. But if you do very, very simple math, you immediately realize that that's completely bullshit, because if you kind of just think about it, so let's assume everyone on the planet, 8 billion people would want to use Lightning, then kind of, even if you make the complete ridiculous assumption that they only have to do one transaction when they're born and kind of to open up a channel, and then 80 years later when they die, they close the channel, which is of course a complete absurd assumption, but even that could not be handled by Bitcoin. So I guess the simple argument is, if we are talking about this idea that L2s are liminal spaces, so kind of then the effects of scalability you get are still limited by the L1 chain, and if the L1 chain is simply too small to kind of to facilitate this entry and exit, again you have limits. So discuss the thing with Bitcoin. Let's look at Ethereum. So those are the numbers of transactions that Ethereum can do, and as you see, since a few years, it's essentially blocks are full, and essentially Ethereum is capable of doing 1.25 million transactions per day, and at least for the next 3 to 4 years, there's nothing on the Ethereum roadmap that will increase that. I mean, maybe we can a little bit increase the gas limit, but fundamentally that is what we have, and that won't change. So kind of, whoops, wrong direction. So I mean, this is just to give you some perspective. If we want to say Ethereum is a settlement layer, something like ENS should live on Ethereum, then even a basic assumption like 10% of the world would want to have an ENS name just to register kind of those 800 million names that would clock Ethereum completely for 2 years. So for 2 years you couldn't do anything else. So kind of just again to give you in perspective, if things should eventually be settled on Ethereum, then still that's a big bottleneck. The other example would be, again, the idea Ethereum should become the global settlement layer. There are currently 45,000 stocks or kind of publicly listed companies in the world. If we think Ethereum should be the settlement layer, eventually those stocks will be tokenized and kind of settle on the chain. And again, if you make the assumption trading of those stocks is maybe happening on L2, but at least the settlement, like let's say for large brokers or even kind of just to kind of move from one L2, kind of settle on L1 and move to another L2, then even kind of here you would just have 30 transfers per stock that are actually doable on Ethereum. So again, kind of there are clear limits with this approach. And again, I mean, we don't want to do, we want to use Ethereum for much more things than settled stocks. So again, just to give perspective. Those scaling limits, of course, are eventually kind of expressed in fees. If there's not enough, or if there's not enough space, simply the fees will rise. And the current state is the fees on an L2 on Ethereum are still proportional to the fees on L1. So right now, most of the time, fees on L2s are in the range of, I don't know, 50 cents. But if fees once in a while spike on Ethereum, they also spike on L2s, and they can easily go even above $1. And there are, of course, plenty of use cases where $1 in transaction fees is absolutely not acceptable. And there's one use case we are working on. So we are actually creating a credit card that is also a hardware wallet. So every time you do a credit card transaction, you are actually authorizing and you're actually doing a blockchain transaction. And for such a use case where you want to do your, I don't know, $3 coffee payment with a card, you absolutely need to have sub-cent transaction fees. And again, L2s on Ethereum can currently and will also not in the future offer that. 4844 will provide improvements, but still we won't get in the sub-cent region. This concept that if you exit to the L1 brings another problem, that if the value you have on the L2 is smaller than kind of the exit fee or kind of the transaction that it would cost to exit to L1, you're kind of stuck in the L2. So it's kind of just economically not feasible to exit. The next argument is not every application can actually be rolled up in such way. So again, we're talking about you deposit, you do a bunch of transactions, and eventually you withdraw. But there are applications that simply create a very rich state. So one project I'm involved with is kind of Circles UBI, but don't need to know too much about this project, but essentially it creates this very, very rich, and this is actually a screenshot of the web of trust, so it creates a very rich state. People kind of trust each other, make connections, or I mean even kind of some projects where you create a lot of NFTs. Those are kind of applications where it's not really possible, or where you don't really have those efficiency gains, because if you generate those 1,000 NFTs, and you would eventually exit them to Ethereum, there's actually not much you are saving compared to issuing directly on Ethereum. Because again, remember, the advantage was that you can do a lot of transactions, but eventually you just need to settle one value. But again, that's not possible in every application. So let's move on with the argument. The conversation has a little bit changed around L2s, and again, initially it was this thing, deposit, eventually withdraw, but what if you never have to leave the L2? What if the L2s are not liminal spaces, but are permanent spaces? So rollups is permanent spaces. And I think this is also kind of pretty much the general idea or general vibe in the Ethereum ecosystem now. Live on L2, consume the blobs, you will own nothing on L1, and you will be happy. So let's look into that. So most of or essentially all of the L2s that exist have proposed a centralized sequencer. So what is a centralized sequencer? It's essentially one entity that can produce blocks. And yes, they are constrained by the L2, so there are mechanisms in place that prevent them to produce invalid blocks, so they cannot just straight steal your money, but they still have a lot of power. So what they easily can do is say, your transaction I don't include. I censor this transaction. Or your transaction I take a little bit higher fee. Or this application I treat different. So, yeah, very, very obvious example is this Base project. And again, don't get me wrong, I really think Base is a great improvement over the status quo. I absolutely do think that users having their assets on Base is much better than users having their assets on Coinbase. But you should not mistake this L2 for a credible neutral platform. So if they wanted to, they can easily kind of, yeah, for example, as described in this tweet here, combine a DEX with the centralized order book, and they can do so because they control the sequencer. And well, then good luck competing with another DEX on this platform. So again, I think it's absolutely a good platform to have, but it's certainly not a neutral platform. And yeah, well, thanks to you guys. So there is famously, even on Ethereum, which is well, supposed to be very decentralized, even on Ethereum, we saw the issue that at some point up to 80% of the blocks were censored, and it's very, very obvious that this is a very real risk that a sequencer might also face, yeah, or will be forced to censor. I mean, we should also be clear here. So people don't do that, or most of the time, people don't do that because they think they wanted to do it, but because their lawyers or essentially there's pressure on them, or they basically have to. So I think there's a very, very real risk that sequencers will have to follow sanctions, or even go so far that they require users to KYC and say kind of we only process transactions from KYC users. And then again, yeah, in theory you can exit or kind of go through the L1, but well, at significant cost, and then that's not really the platform you want to be on. Or well, again, it depends. I mean, I think one should just be aware of this risk. Yeah, another argument that's a little bit more complex is the idea of where is an asset natively issued, and the argument is, if we now think about it, so initially the idea was we exit eventually to the L1, but now we are permanently on the L2. So then the idea is, if the asset is issued natively on the chain, why is this link to the L2 so important after all? So to make it more concrete, on a chain, I mean, usually the argument for L2s is the risk of the bridge, but for assets that are native to the chain, you don't have this bridge risk. And kind of just to make it concrete, on Gnosis Chain, for example, we have various assets that are natively issued on the chain, so kind of this Circles UBI project I talked about earlier, but we also have a stable coin that's actually considered e-money, but whatever. So it's native to the chain, and there a very big argument falls away, because the big argument is for an L2 is kind of to say you inherit the security of the validator set of Ethereum. But for an asset that is native to the chain, even if on kind of on the previous slide, even if 80% or whatever number of validators on, let's say, Gnosis Chain would kind of say, or would make a malicious state transition, your full node would still not accept that state. So as long as, let's say, the Monerium guys, kind of those who are issuing the token, they run a full node and you run a full node, then no matter what the majority, or even if the majority of the validators would go malicious, those full nodes would not accept that malicious state. So the argument is an asset natively issued to the chain and actually running your own full node is the highest level of security you can have. Okay. Next argument is L2s. We discussed initially that L2s currently have this upgrade problem, that they still have those upgrade rights, and they will probably have to keep that for a long time. And that is because Ethereum itself is not yet stable. And in fact, this is a quote from Danny Ryan, Ethereum researcher, who said he himself is not expecting Ethereum to stabilize or kind of to ossify in the next 5 to 10 years. So quite likely, it very much seems like Ethereum will continue to change. And that also poses a challenge to L2s, and I explain why. So for example, there has been this L2 that does a snapshot vote, or you might be familiar with snapshot, with the voting, and they do this voting trustlessly on L2, you do the voting on the L2, and eventually you settle back to the L1. However, what they do is they do Merkle proofs in the L2, but guess what? On the Ethereum roadmap, probably in 1 to 2 years, there's the idea to switch Ethereum, the way Ethereum clients work, from Merkle trees to Verkle trees. Essentially, it will then make it easier to create those proofs, so that's great. But it would break that solution. So it means if you are building an L2, you will likely have to have upgrade mechanisms for the case that Ethereum itself changes. So again, it is in conflict with the idea that the L2s are as trustless as hoped. So finally, after discussing those shortcomings, what is the proposed solution? The proposed solution is, yes, we do need L2s, so it's not about saying we don't need them, but we also need, and well, surprise, surprise, I'm from Gnosis Chain, so of course we see our chain as part of the solution. So we do think we need more L1 block space and more decentralized L1 block space that actually offers this credible neutrality. And I think we are quite proud that Gnosis is very deeply integrated in Ethereum, and we see Gnosis as part of what we call Ethereum-verse. In fact, you can actually use a standard Ethereum client, Nethermind, Aragon, Guess, and you can just run it with a network flag, and it will run Gnosis. That's how deep Gnosis is actually integrated into Ethereum. So what makes all of that much more feasible is the fact that we now can actually have very secure bridges between those states. So what we were able to do, and there are currently at least 4 or 5 teams who have, already working implementations, maybe not yet in production, but very close to it. It is zero knowledge based proof of consensus. So what this bridge does, it runs a full light client of Ethereum in Gnosis Chain. So in Gnosis Chain, in the EVM, we can actually prove the consensus and prove that this is a block that was signed by the majority of the validators. So we have a very secure way to know, to get, essentially to read the state from Ethereum. And we can do the absolute same thing the other way around. So on Ethereum, we can run, again, in a zero-knowledge proof, we can run this light client and get and validate the current state from Ethereum. So that's absolutely a game changer, and that essentially combines the ideas of Cosmos with the idea of Ethereum. So in Cosmos, that was always part of the solution, or part of the idea, that you have those chains that are connected via what they call IBC, inter-blockchain communication. And it was exactly that idea, that chains can run a light client or verify consensus of other chains. And that has been much more challenging for the Ethereum client. But luckily there are so many smart people who figured it out. And now essentially we can have the same interoperability for what we call the Ethereum-verse. So chains that use this execution environment, so the EVM and the consensus, the beacon chain. So the conclusion of the talk is L2s can leverage the decentralization. So we have this great decentralized chain Ethereum, and we can leverage it with L2s to create essentially more of that block space, but that leverage has limits, and therefore we cannot stop to invest in decentralization, and we need to produce more of this, what we call credible, neutral block space, and that's essentially the mission of Ethereum. So we actually just launched this dashboard to kind of measure our decentralization. We already have 100,000 validators in, I think, 60 countries. Our goal is actually to go further, to have a validator, ideally at least in every country, at least one validator in every country of this world. So here are a few of the trade-offs. So again, say it again, not necessarily that L2s are false, but you should consider it. It's an option and it's a choice, and kind of depending on what things you value, maybe a chain like Gnosis Chain, which we are explicit about, we are not an L2, is the better option. Thank you.